Hi, this is Dustin Hausner. I'm the Jewish Outreach and Program Director at the Wayne YMCA. Our programs are funded through the Jewish Federation of Northern New Jersey. We have a very special guest here today. Evan Karvjensky is from Blauvelt, New York, specifically in Rockland County. She is married with 3 children. She was involved in her local PTA and involved in a local synagogue. When her children started to face instances of anti-Semitism in school, and when she saw an uptick of hate on local social media, Evan created the Facebook activism page Rockland is One, the purpose of which is to unite the Jewish and non-Jewish communities of Rockland County while disseminating accurate and constructive information. In addition to her local media activism, Evan is a member of the Community Relations Committee of the Jewish Federation and Foundation of Rockland County, is involved with volunteering with the JCC, and supports other local nonprofits. Most recently, Evan has become involved with local and state politics and endeavors to continue her fight against anti-Semitism and hate. She is also, when she's not agitating, Evan sings lead vocals with her band Incidental Contact, plays with and spoils her dogs, and posts about the antics on social media. So Evan, it is wonderful to have you here today.
Thank you for having me. It's great.
So, unfortunately, this is a very heavy subject, to say the least. Even in this week alone, I received updates from NPR, ADL, a number of different organizations talking about how, especially with the coronavirus, there seems to be a focus or uptick in anti-Semitism on social media. Before we go into the details of anti-Semitism on social media, I was wondering, from your personal standpoint and what you've seen on social media, do you find that these claims are fairly accurate? And if so, do you think there's been a particular reason for such an uptick?
I think that that's very accurate. I think, before COVID-19, there was a tremendous, tremendous presence of anti-Semitism on social media, particularly in Rockland County, because we have a large Hasidic community here and Orthodox community. But I think that the anger online has been exacerbated by the virus. And we've seen a tremendous uptick. There was actually just an article that came out this morning on News 12 that said that, white supremacist groups are becoming more and more active, even in the Hudson Valley. So, it's also becoming, people are noticing it more, in the media. So it's not just, Rockland's own little problem now. I think it's becoming more widespread and noticed.
So I'm curious when it comes to these sort of things, because obviously you are someone who runs a page that deals with this subject matter and someone who is an activist yourself. I'm curious, what type of content have you seen? Because, anyone who's on these pages or on these groups may know what they are right away. But if you, let's say, have someone watching here who's maybe older, who's not on social media often, what type of things have you found as being said?
Well, along with the anti-Semitic tropes that we see often, even before the virus, I think that there has been, a tremendous misrepresentation about the Orthodox community that continues. I think, there's fabrication, there's exaggeration. Part of one of the big problems is that people have been going out with their phones, what I call looking for gotcha moments, of looking for people in the Hasidic community out not social distancing. And, there's plenty of people out not social distancing. Everybody should be social distancing, but because it's easy to pick out a Hasidic person, and people want, I think, their 15 minutes of Facebook fame. They're out there with their cameras at the ready. I know that people are alerting other people when there's gatherings, even when the gatherings are, acceptable. Like when there was an occasion where, a school was giving out food and learning materials, just as public schools are giving out food and learning materials. But because, people were out there with their cameras at the ready and it got reported and it got blown up on media, they were fined. And it was completely acceptable. But that's unfortunately, where we're at right now. I mean, I think people are understandably concerned for their own health, for the health and the safety of their families. But I think they're also looking for scapegoats, and that's what is happening right now.
So I'm curious, in the case of, let's say someone posts a video, let's say an image or a video of a family, you mentioned Orthodox, walking around in a park or something like that. How do you make the determination when it's a post meant to incite anti-Semitism or bigotry versus, trying to raise awareness? Because I know with social media, there's, that challenge of freedom of speech versus, what is then hate
Sure.
speech. So I'm curious if you can list, what are ways to spot it in that sense in the coronavirus, and then we'll get into the more generalized, when it's not the coronavirus, because I know that's a bigger conversation.
Sure. I think, I think that that's tough. I think from what I am seeing, I don't see a lot of posts with just people out. And there are people out. There are people out hiking. There are people out, especially when the weather's nice, right? There's people out hiking. There's people out in the park. There's people out walking. There's people out whatever. I don't see a lot of people taking pictures of those people. The only posts that I see are posts of Orthodox people or ultra Orthodox people. And, I also, feel that if somebody has a genuine concern about people congregating, then the authorities should be notified. The health department should be notified. Putting it up on social media is not going to get the help that you need. That's just looking to incite people. And that's when it turns into what I think turns into anti-Semitism. Also, what happens when somebody posts that, the comments underneath normally go downhill pretty quickly and turn into being about the Jewish community, and they don't do this, and they and them, and they and them, and that's when it becomes, an issue.
Do you find that in those instances when, let's say, someone's repeatedly posting things that are, about a specific community or communities that you feel are anti-Semitic, or another person would feel is anti-Semitic, do you feel that there's been some sort of way to respond in a constructive manner? Has it been kind of just fighting along giant chains? Has the admins been able to come in and try and coordinate it? Like, in a normal situation, what has been the way to address if you've seen these type of posts?
You're using with the virus right now?
I'm saying pre, but
specifically?
Yeah, but we can also lean into
Right.
in general, so that's fine too.
So along with Rockland is one, which I have really tried not to delve into a lot of the virus stuff going on there, because I don't think at this point it's healthy to constantly be battling with people right now, because I do think we all need to come together. I'm also an admin of a very large local page in Rockland County, very large. And when these posts started to happen, there's two other admins. We got together and we said, okay, we can't constantly navigate this page in this way. We can't be a babysitter this way. First of all, we have lives, right? And it's not healthy. It's not healthy for the community. There's also kids on the page. There's high school kids on the page. And, the kids see what's going on, and they look to the adults, and that's how they're garnering a lot of their information. So we decided that we are going to turn off. We're going to start approving every post that comes through, which is what we did. People weren't necessarily happy about it, but, Facebook is not a God-given right. There are First Amendment rights, but, everybody doesn't have the right to say whatever they want everywhere, because that page is our domain. We decided to start approving posts, which has been great. And because we are able to, and that's not, it's whether it's about the Hasidic community, whether it's about politics right now, which is also, heightened. And I know there are several other pages that have done that as well, which has worked really well. When posts do go bad, I would like for other admins to take, their role responsibly in the community. I don't think at this point it's doing anybody any good to go in and battle, because at this point I don't think you're going to change anybody's minds. That's unfortunate, but I think people are that upset right now, so report it.
So let's make the transition then from kind of specifically the coronavirus and how you deal with the incidents of anti-Semitism versus the when it's not the coronavirus time, I guess is the way of putting it. Because you've had the Rockland One page, I think, for a number of years now. So, I guess, it's mentioned when I read, the bio a little bit that, this started in part because of an incident with your children. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the origin of like Rockland is One and your activism, and then kind of talk about what you've, seen as kind of challenges. Because, I think for a lot of people, it's like, oh, anti-Semitism is bad. Why should this still be a problem in 2020 or 2019 or 2018? So I'd be very curious to learn a little bit more about your experience, why the page was created, and why, or what type of things have you been dealing with?
Sure. So I started the page because, as you said, my kids, when they were younger, were faced with some pretty nasty anti-Semitism, which caused me to get more involved on social media in local pages, because we have a few pages in Rockland County that are, I feel are overtly anti-Semitic and have an agenda against the community. I was banned from those pages. And just for expressing an opinion, not being angry, not being abusive, just for expressing my own opinion. So I started Rockland is One to be able to get my opinions out there and to offer a counter argument to that. My idea when the page started was, again, to unite all of Rockland County and to also educate about, the Jewish community at large, because I think that there's a false narrative out there and a lot of bad information being given, and also to unite the Jewish communities as well. The page evolved, probably not now what it started out to be. I've also become much more careful. When I started the page, I was anonymous, and I'm not anymore. So that makes a big difference. It's also a bit of a target to local politicians and some other people. So, it's evolved. I think it still has its role, and I think it serves its purpose, and it gets, some information out there that normally wouldn't get out there in Rockland County.
Do you feel that the work you're doing is specifically only Rockland oriented, in the sense that, have you come to deal with issues of hearing, like, let's say areas in different parts of New York or New Jersey have, different people who are doing these anti-Semitic statements, or even that there are groups that exist that are promoting these type of causes? Like, I'm just curious if you found that while you are focused in Rockland, if you've also seen these incidents in other places as well.
I have, and it's interesting because, my role has kind of evolved. And I guess as people found out about Rockland is One and I got more active on Twitter, there's definitely a community of people fighting anti-Semitism on social media. In Lakewood, New Jersey, there's a very similar problem. And, different nuances. But, I've made some connections with some folks down there, and I'm very cognizant of what happens, in areas in New Jersey all over the place. Specifically, obviously, there's anti-Semitism everywhere, right now in the world. It's very, very hyper-focused here, I think, for a number of reasons, including some of our local politicians who have gained national attention because of some of their campaigns that smack of overt anti-Semitism. I have kind of broadened the scope, but still try to focus mostly on Rockland. But if there is stuff that happens other places, I think it's important for people to realize that there is anti-Semitism happening. There is real overt anti-Semitism happening. And I think people really need to open their eyes to it and be aware of it and speak out against it.
So going a little bit to like an everyday kind of the normal situation when it's not COVID-19, because you mentioned that right now you're trying not to necessarily fight back in the sense of certain types of things just because of the environment right now. But, pre-COVID-19, when let's say you saw things on social media, what was methods you've used to try and address it, and to be more clear, what is some of the content, without any, you don't have to say anyone's names, of course, but the content you'd see that necessarily was anti-Semitic, because as you mentioned earlier, you mentioned like they, them, you didn't say that, these are people just posting SWAT stickers and, burning crosses, because I think for people who are not necessarily as knowledgeable, they think that anti-Semitism is really, you put a Nazi symbol up, you put a KKK
Sure.
symbol up, and that's really, that's the bottom line.
Right.
Whereas I think there's many nuances that many people aren't as familiar with.
I think that's true. And I think especially in areas like Lakewood and Rockland County, there are certain words that, yeah, they are synonymous with anti-Semitism here. I mean, listen, you've got the regular tropes, right? You have, creating the other, right? Those and them. You have, vermin, roaches, rats, spreading disease, which is basically what's, plagues, which is happening now.
And these are things you read even prior to COVID-19.
Oh yeah, prior. Yeah. There are some code words here, right? So overdevelopment is a big word here, right? Yes, there are problems with overdevelopment in Rockland County. When the word gets used in a social media, in the venue, right? And then it can be used in a way to, have a real conversation about overdevelopment. The problem becomes when that conversation devolves, right? That they don't belong here, they shouldn't be here. Then it becomes an issue of things that are really just have become almost urban legend. There's tropes of they don't pay their taxes because they don't get married legally. They don't do this. And there's a tremendous generalization, right? And that's when the conversation starts to devolve away from the real issues that need to be faced in Rockland County into tropes, which is problematic. So, ideally to enlighten, to respond, and not in a hostile way, and try to explain and educate that these things that you're saying are wrong, and this is why they can be interpreted as anti-Semitic. Unfortunately, over the past couple of years, we've gotten, people who go into these groups and try to, shed light, that we're playing the anti-Semitic card, which is used to lessen the impact of anti-Semitism.
Okay.
It's problematic. It really is. It's problematic. I think the most important thing that can be done, because you're not always going to get through to people, is to report comments that you see to Facebook, to group admins. You can do both. You can report to group admins. You can report directly to Facebook. And if it's something particularly egregious, I've seen more violent posts as well and comments. Those get reported to the authorities, to the ADL specifically. You can report, right to the ADL at their website. That's also important as well.
So just to recap a little bit, so if it's an actual direct threat of violence or some sort of hostile harm, you report obviously to your local law enforcement, you report to the ADL. If it's something that's offensive but not to that degree of direct violence, then you mentioned, reporting it to the admin or to Facebook. Have you found that those have been, for the most part, fairly successful? Have you found that they've been, lopsided? Like, what has been your experience with them? Because I've heard of, instances where it's very helpful, and others where, because of the way it's coded, it doesn't necessarily help. So I'd be very curious to know for Facebook, and also if any of the other social medias, if it's similar, that you could report that way or something different.
It's very, very tricky. Twitter takes it very seriously. So if you see something on Twitter and you report it, odds are, if it's really blatant, it's going to get flagged and taken down. Instagram,
Okay.
Facebook is tough.
Tough as in they enforce, or tough as in
they don't enforce. They don't. It has to be really, really blatant. Again, I think that, and even right now, Facebook, is having their own issues because of COVID. But pre-COVID, it's very difficult because, again, especially when you're talking in code words, right? That Facebook isn't set up to recognize,
Mhm.
right? So the word Ramapo,
Okay.
which, the words Ramapo Mafia, let's
Mm.
say that, which is a big thing here.
Mm.
Uh, Facebook's not going to pick that up. They don't understand that as something that's derogatory.
Okay.
However, in my opinion, reporting it is still important, because even if it doesn't get taken down, it's still flagging it to the platform. It's flagging it that something is happening here.
Hmm. Okay.
So that's important for them to see. And everything is, they make a note of it. Some group admins, as far as reporting to admins, they want to know that there's stuff happening on their page that's wrong. And I've had there's a pretty good success rate of getting stuff taken down, reporting to group admins if they're really not aware of what's happening and it's not part of their agenda.
Okay. So kind of, because you alluded to it a little bit in two ways, actually. So you mentioned, and again, I'm not asking for any specific names, but you mentioned that like officials and admin might, if not encourage, be okay with the anti-Semitic rhetoric or whatever. I'm curious why someone would be interested in that sort of thing. I mean, isn't anti-Semitism something that's everyone agrees is blatantly bad? Just for someone who may not be in the know, why would anyone peddle in something like that? Or do you think that people would be okay with that sort of thing?
I don't understand it personally. But the line has gotten very blurry about anti-Semitism and what is anti-Semitism. And if you're fighting a battle about overdevelopment or the health of your school system, the line has become blurry. And again, it's that anti-Semitic card that people are supposedly using. Anti-Semitism is anti-Semitism. Nobody asks for it. Nobody asks for the hate. Nobody asks for the blame. Nobody asks to be called roaches or vermin or have lies spread about them or be yelled at on the streets, right? That's anti-Semitism. Nothing, it's not okay. So if you have, group admins, or if you have local leaders that build up their base with anger and, need this strategy for votes and to, enrage people to get them on board with you, that's their agenda, unfortunately.
So basically, you're saying that for a number of people, these Jewish communities you mentioned, I think you mentioned Orthodox and Hasidic, Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox, more specifically, they're used at times more as a scapegoat for some people in order to, be able to pass blame or to,
Sure.
get people from. So, okay.
Sure, and especially now, I mean, look, let's just use, the time we're living in now, because it's so specific and bizarre. Throughout history, whenever there's been an economic or a health scare in the world, unfortunately, the Jews were often blamed, right? So, it's very easy to blame the other, and especially the Orthodox and the Hasidic, because they look different. It's very easy to pin that blame on them. People are, honestly, again, I understand they are frightened for their lives. They are frightened for their livelihoods. They are frightened for their families. And, human nature is, unfortunately, you feel like you need someone to blame. The Jews are an easy target for that. And it becomes an easier target when you have social media fueling it, when you have local leadership fueling it, and not speaking out against it and not calling for unity, and instead looking for a scapegoat. It's unfortunate, but that's what we're living through right now.
Have you found that Jewish communities, because, we could go down the list of the different sects and denominations and different types of Judaism, have you found that many Jews have been receptive in fighting back against the anti-Semitism, or have you found they've been fairly silent on the issue, or just
I lost you for a second. That
yeah, so
other Jews.
So I was saying, yeah, basically like other Jewish communities or the diverse multi-Jewish communities, have you found they have been active in fighting against anti-Semitism? Have you found they've been fairly silent, or that it's a lack of knowledge that this is even going on because of, just as you mentioned, people have lives, people have other things going on. So
Sure.
I'm curious how you have found that type of response, if any.
I think it's a mix. I honestly do. I think I'm going to be really, really honest. I think right now, to speak up in support of the Jewish community on any of our community pages, particularly in Rockland, puts a target on your back. I don't think anybody wants to be bullied, right? And the environment right now is that when somebody speaks out in defense of the Hasidic community on some of our local pages, you will get torn limb from limb, figuratively. I don't know that anybody wants to put themselves through that right now. I certainly don't. We're all quarantined. We're all living in this, emotionally stressful time right now. It's a hard thing to do, to go and put yourself out there, and that's understandable. And that's why I think it's important, even if you can't fight, if you can't fight these people one-on-one, that's understandable. It's not always an easy thing to do, to speak up, especially where we're at right now. But it is important that you report it. And that's how people can help. And when we come out the other side of this, I think there's going to be a lot of work to do, because I don't think that, I think the ramifications of what's happening right now is going to be very long lasting.
So reaching out to the ADL when it's a specific threat, is there other agencies or things you would recommend for either reporting or for trying to find information? Because again, if you're, let's say, someone who's just, seeing these things for the first time and doesn't know who to talk to or to go to, things like that, has there been resources that you found, or kind of the opposite?
I mean, the ADL is helpful. I think your local federations are helpful. Federations have community relations committees. They can be helpful. Other than that, not so much. Not so much.
No, but look, I want
just me
transparency. So, but so
it's interesting. I will say that since I started this in this past couple of years, because people are afraid to speak out, I have just random people send me information, sending me screenshots, sending me, strangely, in the last couple of months, I'm friends with this person on Facebook. Mm-hmm. They're posting all of this awful stuff. Can you go say something? And I'm like, but I'm not friends with it. They're like, it's okay. Can you go say something? Cause you're good at it. And I'll do that. Right. I'll do that. And I think it's hard for people to find their voice. I get that. It's hard. And it's scary.
So, well, in the example you just gave, you sound like you're a kind of go-to person. If someone says an anti-Semitic comment and you don't know what the words are to say, then they go to you. So I'm curious, have you found, and you alluded to it a little bit earlier when we were talking, but have you found that other areas are either having versions of Rockland is one, or is having people like yourself who are advocates? Because as you said, it's hard for any person to comment, and then if they're viciously attacked, to then not want to say anything again, and the anti-Semitism then continues. So I'm curious if you have found that there's been kind of that surgence of people trying to address the issue since you've started, or if it's something where you find that you're almost the one person with the beacon in the back swinging it around and, hoping that there's other people that will start picking up the flame.
That's a good question. I think for sure down in Lakewood, there have been a number of people who fought back and continue to fight back. They've kind of pulled together and found each other and found me, which is really interesting. What makes me unique is that I am not a religious Jew. Mm-hmm. Most of the people that are fighting this are from within the community. Okay. So it kind of makes me kind of an outlier in all this, which is why I started Rockland as One, was because I am a secular Jew. Mm-hmm. And it put me in a unique position. And I've made some, great friends, and, inroads with the Orthodox community. I haven't really seen very many other groups in Rockland that have come forward. I mean, there's definitely people that I can count on to, back me up.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a weird position to be in and to put yourself in publicly. So, yeah.
No. Like I said, I'm only looking for information because I want, especially anyone who's watching this, to get kind of as much of a broad picture of what's going on as much as possible.
Yeah.
Especially, this is a very important subject, and I think, especially when it's not overt, I think if someone says something that's, I hate Jewish people, or put the swastika or something like that, and that's overt, everyone then condemns it right away. But if it's something that's not so overt, or if in the cases that you've been saying, if you know it because you live in the area, if you know the dog whistles, the nuances, then you see it, but others may not, which I think is a great challenge, because then, I would be curious, how have you been able to explain it to someone who isn't from the area? So in other words, you mentioned like Ramapo Mafia, how the Facebook system won't understand what the intention of that means.
Yeah.
So when you've tried talking to other people about this, and they'll see posts that say, we have an overdevelopment issue, and, that community's trying to take over, or, things that sound maybe to one person like, oh, that's a legitimate concern, but you may hear something different. Like, how have you been able to have that conversation, if you've been able to? Because it sounds very difficult, to be very honest.
It's interesting because a while back, I asked my friends on Facebook, my personal friends, I'm like, do you all have this going on in your areas? Like, is this a thing that happened? Like, that you have these large community groups and hate pages that just rail against Jews?
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, no, we don't. This is really a very local phenomenon that happens, and it's allowed. And in Lakewood as well, and the shore towns in New Jersey, I think also. It's really where there's a large Hasidic population.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what's happening on Long Island. I've asked, and I haven't found that it's as hateful out there on social media.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a weird thing to explain to people what's happening here. Like, they often can't believe it, because although some of it's veiled, it's really not. But I think it's important, really, really, for people, when they see something, to say something, even if it's in school, right? If your kids come home and your kids say something to you like, oh, this kid said something to me about, me being a Jew, or those people. I mean, I've had my kids say things. I've had other people's, secular Jews kids that have come home and told them that horrible things have been said to their kids. I've had non-Jewish people tell me things that they've heard that their kids have said. I think that's really, really, really important that the schools are notified of that. I think it's really important that it's tolerance training is done in all of the schools, and Holocaust education is done in all of the schools. And I think it's important not to brush any of this under the rug as acceptable, because none of it's acceptable, and it just grows. And my biggest concern is that the kids are hearing and watching what is happening in all of these groups, because I have a teenager who's on Instagram, and she's telling me that there's one group specifically on Instagram. It is absolutely horrific. They are taking the posts that they see in Rockland, and they're putting it into these groups that kids are in. When I say kids, I mean ideally teenagers, which is a long, age group for them to handle. And it's pervasive. It is absolutely pervasive. And we're raised, there's another generation coming up. And that's very, very frightening to me, that these kids are being raised in this environment of hate.
So you've mentioned a lot of different ways of being, reactive in, when you see it, say something, when you see it, report it. What are proactive approaches that you think, and you've mentioned a couple of it by, Holocaust education, but, what are things that either local leaders, organizations, or even just parents or, friends can do to try and be proactive in dealing with this? Because, it's one thing to address it when it's out of the bottle, but to try
Sure.
and contain it before it's out, is a very different matter. So I was wondering what your thoughts on that subject were.
I think it's very important, specifically for the Jewish community, non-religious Jews, and if we're focusing on social media right now, when you see something positive happen, share it. Share it. I think it's also important to share negative things about anti-Semitism happening locally, because it'll make it more in the forefront and it'll be in more of people's consciousness that this is something we need to be aware of. But when there's also positive things that happen, whether it's in the Hasidic community, whether it's in your own, with your own synagogue, whether it's something, share it. Share it publicly for all of your friends to see, for your Jewish friends to see, for your non-Jewish friends to see. Show the good, right? Because in the end, we all need unity. We're all one community, and we all have to coexist. We do. Nobody's going anywhere. We need to coexist. And, for our kids' sake, for all of our sake, putting out, I still believe ideally that putting out good, will come back to us. And, that's really important for people to see that no one community is all bad. And when you have this constant narrative of the other and they're bad and they're doing bad, it's just not true. It's just not true. There are outliers in every community that don't do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just exacerbated and magnified when it comes from the Orthodox community. And that's unfortunate. And we need to change that narrative.
Just for anyone who would like to learn a little bit more about anti-Semitism in the sense of like how to see it, how to spot it. Me personally, the Yad Vashem has a very good index of years of different research and communities. What are different signs for anti-Semitism? Because I think it's one of those terms that gets thrown around a lot, where not everyone necessarily understands what it means, and because of that, like any word you use, if you use it too much, it loses some meaning, which then can be quite dangerous. But I'm curious, have you found like certain ways of explaining anti-Semitism that has been helpful, or even just for Jewish people who, once again, think it's simply the Nazis and the KKK, they don't see or know the history of underlying anti-Semitism or some of the stereotypes. So I'm curious if there's somewhere you would either direct to or a description you yourself might have.
It's interesting. There's a lot there. I think the ADL has good resources. I think the Simon Wiesenthal Center has good resources. I think you should use your local federation as a good resource. Mm-hmm. There are a couple of really great authors out there, particularly Barry Weiss is an author. She has a great book out. You can also watch some of her lectures online. And Deborah Lipstadt, who's a Holocaust historian, her definitions of and explanations of what anti-Semitism are pretty dead on. It's an interesting thing. Like I got into a little bit before, when horrible things happen throughout history, very often the Jews were scapegoated, and it's very interesting with, and I think this might be Deborah Lipstadt's explanation, but it's kind of a widely, held belief that with the Jews, it's interesting, right? When something goes wrong, you can punch up at the Jews, right? Because they're in control of the media, they own the bank, they have all the money, right? So that's punching up at the establishment. However, on the other side of that, they're rats, they're roaches, they are on welfare, they're this or that, it's punching down, right? So either way, that's anti-Semitism. Up, but it's just very, very unique to the Jews that it kind of goes both ways.
I think there's always been a bit of that contradiction. One of the great examples I was given was, as you mentioned, all these Jewish capitalists, but at the same time, there's so many Jewish communists and socialists, and how capitalists and communists, like that's the thing about hate. It doesn't have to make sense. If it's a bullet point you can reuse, or an interesting slogan or something like that, then it creates a life of its own, unfortunately. So
sure. And and also you also have that on politically, right? You have the left and the right who are tending to blame each other and being at each other with anti-Semitism, when it's really both extremes. And there's a graphic out there of a horseshoe, right? And in the middle, it's the thing of anti-Semitism and the Jews, because it's in the middle of that. It's the left and the right, the extremes. So, it's kind of getting it on all sides, from both sides, from the top and the bottom. And it's really just, it's raising awareness and trying to change the narrative. I think that's important.
So I think we're going to slowly wrap up in a little bit, but I'd be curious. I'm not asking you to recruit people who are watching this necessarily, but I'm simply asking if, number one, if you think the issue of anti-Semitism is a serious issue that needs more focus in social media, in the sense of learning what it is and how it's operating, if it's something people should be more aware of. And secondly, what are the key takeaways one should get from this conversation in regards to how to deal with anti-Semitism?
Sorry.
It's all right.
Hang on.
All right.
Hi, I'm in a meeting. Can I call you back? That worked.
Appreciate that. So.
I think it does need more attention. I think it needs to be brought to the forefront. Listen, anti-Semitism is an ugly, ugly, ugly thing to see, right? And it's not a pretty reflection on the society that we're in right now. And I think that people tend to, when they see a lot of things, close their eyes to it and sweep it under the rug. And I think it needs to really be brought to the forefront. I think, again, see something, say something. I think you need to constantly be vigilant. I think we need to report when you feel that you can, speak up, educate. It's important to educate. I don't know. I mean, and use your resources, if anybody wants to talk to me, I'd be happy to talk to them and be a resource. I don't remember the second part of your question.
No, that was so. If somebody wants to speak with you, because you offered, I was not going to originally offer because it sounds like you're very busy. But if someone wants to learn more about what you're doing, where can they get in touch with you, or where they can find you?
Yeah, they can message me through Rockland is One. They can go to Rockland is One and message me on there, or they can find me on Facebook and message me as well. I'm pretty responsive.
Wonderful. So, Evan, I want to thank you so much for taking the time today. I'm glad we were worthy of you not answering that phone call. We appreciate that. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And for yourself and those who are listening, please stay safe. Please stay healthy, be well, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you.